We will never give up. We will never concede.
We have seen riots in Washington.
New wounds to the heart of our democracy.
The worst attack on law enforcement and our democracy that I've seen in my entire career.
It was an attack on our republic itself.
We're trending toward secession.
We're in high school. I'd take you behind the gym and beat the hell out of them.
Democracy at times will be challenged.
This is a real ongoing threat.
It can't go on this way. There cannot be a peaceful coexistence.
America's at a crossroads. I know that feels like a little bit of a cliche after John Kasich's speech at the DNC last summer.
America is at that crossroads today.
But that feels like an eternity ago. And not just because of the snow. January's insurrection exposed that our democracy may be on shakier ground than anyone wants to admit. This America, the one we're living in now, isn't sustainable. I mean, we're either going to go down one road that eventually leads to the collapse of our republic. For the sake of argument and sanity, let's say we don't. Or we're going to forge a path down the other road, one that reunites our states, is built on compromise, and saves our democracy. One that prioritizes healing over hyperpartisanship. I talked to a lot of experts who had a lot of thoughts on this one, but I want to focus on four today: the sociologist, the former conservative blogger, the politician, and the historian. You're going to hear some common themes, some of which may be hard for you to consider, but it'll be worth it.
My name is Dr. Rubin May. I'm a professor of sociology at the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana.
He's also known as Reginald S. Stuckey, the rapping professor.
It's summer. I got the bags, no humber, waking you up from your slumber, shaking your world with occasional claps of thunder.
He says much of our division is rooted in the struggle over whether immigrants, new ideas, and other reforms will force Americans to, as another famous rapper put it, lose yourself.
What we have to be able to do as a country is to assure people that change does not necessarily mean that something is falling away, something is disappearing, you're losing something. And that's what we haven't been able to do successfully, and partly because it serves very little interest for people who want to maintain power and position to actually engage this in any real way.
Advocates for progress clash with advocates for the status quo. But Professor May says we've all gone down a road where neither compromise nor compassion is welcome for those who disagree.
One of the key things that we need to do is to get to the essence of people's insecurities, to recognize why they feel like their position, their status, their life is in jeopardy. People get this sense we're losing ourselves if you don't stand firm to what you believe in.
I'm going to be a president for all America. It's all about commitment that the American people make to one another.
The first step to saving ourselves may come from the White House. Whether you agree with Joe Biden's policies or not, the sociologist says the president's willingness to show compassion could open the door for America to do the same. But the next step, listening to our neighbors and those whom we disagree with, is on all of us.
There's a lot more in common that we have with one another and that people have in this country than we have this different. And once we address that and engage that, then we are actually now moving forward. So get people to see a wide range of perspectives, then get them to connect to other people that are not like them, and then we can grow our change in this way.
My name is Matthew Sheffield. I am a writer, and I am also a television and radio producer.
He's also a former devout Mormon and a former devout critic of liberals, launching the popular site Newsbusters. Sheffield says there may be no greater political tool than division, and no easier way to divide America than over religion.
Non-Republicans need to understand just how much the conservative movement is motivated by religious zealotry. It's really radicalized a lot of people because they've been told for decades that the whole world is resting upon who they vote for Congress or president or governor.
But Sheffield says not every Christian feels connected to the far right. So the power to bridge the religious and thus political divide may rest in the hands of Democrats, who he says haven't been welcoming toward moderate Republicans.
It's easy to slip into a pattern of thinking that, well, everybody who disagrees with me is, forever irredeemable, we just can't coexist. But the reality is you have to. So there needs to be more of a space for people who have more traditionalist viewpoints but are not far right. And those voices need to be elevated.
He says the suppression of moderate voices on social media threatens our democracy too.
I've pretty much come to the viewpoint that social networks should be nonprofit because the incentives for-profit businesses to run a social media empire are all negative. The problem with so much of social media, but also news debate shows, is that they're not structured toward understanding the perspective of somebody else who disagrees with you. They're structured toward conflict. And the reality is that if you can't have an in-depth conversation where each side is speaking their values in good faith.
Pence lied to us. He's a total treasonous pig.
Then how are people going to see that in their personal lives?
To put it bluntly, the deck seems stacked against our democracy. So Sheffield thinks it'll take work both inside and outside Washington to address it.
If Biden were to move his policy agenda and to market it toward these centrist Republicans who are out there, he could actually achieve quite a bit.
I'm Heidi Heitkamp. I'm the former United States Senator from North Dakota. Probably what I'm most famous for is being a Democrat winning a Senate seat in a ruby red state.
What will it take to prevent our republic from following in the footsteps of so many others that have collapsed?
My concern is that people don't really understand how serious the threat is, how serious and tenuous our democracy is. The greatest damage that President Trump did, in my opinion, was pit one group of Americans against another group of Americans and said they're the bad guys instead of we all have to be in this together.
They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime. They're rapists.
Democrats fell into that trap too. If Twitter's any indication, all kinds of people tend to take pleasure in seeing residents of another state suffer through a crisis just because that state is typically seen as a red or a blue one. The former senator had a message for all partisans. You gotta replace demonization with humanization.
Remember that 74 million people voted for President Trump. And I'm not saying all of them share every idea that he ever had or any bad impulse he ever had, but they felt like he was the better leader for a reason. We need to have a communication with those people, and we need to sit down and decide these are our neighbors, these are our friends.
Much like religion has been used to divide America for political gain, Heitkamp sees us being sorted along urban and rural lines too. So she started an organization aimed at erasing them.
There's a reason why we called our project One Country, because we believe we need to be united under common purpose. We aren't always going to agree, but we need to disagree respectfully, and we need to quit demonizing the other side. I firmly believe that we all want the same things. We use different methods to get there.
So how do we get to a place that seems so out of reach right now? Heitkamp says we return normalcy by returning to the mantra that all politics is local.
The only way to fix it is to get out of Washington and start having that dialogue. If I were the president, what I would be doing is I would be putting out a 50-state plan, where I'm going to go, what I'm going to talk about, who I'm going to visit with, and who I'm going to listen to. It's time for politicians to get out of Washington and start listening to people and bringing people together and convening meetings that aren't just about rallying your supporters, but are about bringing communities together to solve problems. I hope President Biden doesn't just go and talk to people who agree with him, but he spends a lot of time listening to people who disagree with him. I think that can make all the difference in the world.
Hi, I'm Priya Sethi, and I'm a professor of history at Stanford University.
She knows a thing or two about empires in peril as an expert in British imperial history. And there's some overlap between our story of unrest and their near civil war 100 years ago.
Major politicians, including Churchill, were like inciting violence, to resist the implementation of Home Rule in Ireland. And in the end, Archduke Frank Ferdinand gets assassinated and World War starts, and both sides of that conflict in Britain come together and unite to fight Britain's other enemies. So, and that's an accident of history.
America could use an accident of history too right now. And maybe history will prove that COVID, or the protests over George Floyd's murder, or January 6th will be one of those turning points. Because Sethi says just relying on exceptionalism isn't enough to protect world power.
The latter half of the 20th century, there was sort of an automatic assumption behind most historical thinking that history always tends toward progress kind of automatically. If you just sit back and wait, history will turn out okay. It's not going to happen automatically because of a well-oiled government machinery or anything like that. Is American power preeminent in the world? I don't know if that's how we should be judging the health of American society. Maybe we should look more at, is there less inequality in America? Is everyone well employed? Does everyone have health insurance?
That means confronting century-old gender and racial inequalities and strengthening democracy through better education.
Humanistic study so that people are better readers, are better able to distinguish fact from fiction. All those, an investment in those fields has really eroded in recent decades. This culture of conspiracy theories and paranoia that's been abetted, maybe even created by social media, has really endangered trust in institutions. If you know the real history of the United States, if you have a good, accurate narrative of it, you won't go storming around the Capitol building with a Confederate flag, right? You would know that that's a really false narrative of American history. The more educated we are, the more we're able to cope with this media universe. Nothing is going to work itself out. It is on us to work things out.
So what will it take for our nation to avoid the road of collapse, one that the Greeks, the Romans, and the USSR all eventually went down? In short, our panel agrees it's pushing back against the politics of division and not vilifying people just because they voted for different candidates as you. Washington may not point us toward the right road, but we can, and save our democracy, if we want to. Hey everyone, Noah Pransky here. Thanks for checking out the NBCLX YouTube channel. For more videos, click here. And don't forget to click subscribe to join the NBCLX community.